Welcome to Lead Brightly, real conversations about the relationship between confidence and leadership success and what it really takes to lead with the clarity and the courage that inspires other people to follow. Now, it's a real pleasure to be joined today by Randal Tiny Smith, who is anything but, he's 6'7", but he is a former senior Royal Air Force officer who's transitioned into the automotive engineering industry with Jaguar Land Rover, playing a key role in the development of the Jaguar I-Pace electric vehicle. And since then, he's led the growth and transformation of multiple businesses across EV charging, renewable energy, and infrastructure, establishing himself as a recognized industry expert. So it is no surprise that Randal is now a sought-after speaker at industry events and conferences. And through his advisory work and business, he supports energy and infrastructure projects across the UK, US, Saudi Arabia, and India. Now, his mission is simple but huge. It's to cut through the noise and the massive amount of misinformation surrounding the energy transition and attempting successfully to help organizations and individuals make informed decisions that actually accelerate that shift to cleaner energy and a more sustainable future that we all need and want. So, Randal, welcome to Lead Brightly. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. It's a great privilege to be here.
Well, we met a couple of days ago and had lunch, which is what sparked this conversation today. And I'm so utterly fascinated about you and by you that I want more. And I want to share that with people as well, because there are so many lessons that we can learn from you from lots of different angles. But before we get into the leadership, the military, I'd really love to understand a little bit more about you and what it was like to be young Randal and what attracted you into the Royal Air Force in the first place.
Oh, crazy story. Well, when I was a little baby getting changed. No, I mean, I had a sort of checkered childhood, I suppose I would call it. I wasn't very good at school, but primarily because I played around and everything else. I traveled around. My father, I was a CEO. My mother died when I was 15, and I kind of went off the rails a little bit when in my teenage years. And you sort of go through life, and I had friends sort of saying to me, you were either going to be dead or you were going to be in prison, which is kind of a bit of a sobering thought when people are telling you that. And I just thought I needed to straighten out. I needed to sort my life out because I was going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And I had an interest in aviation, and I had an interest in engineering, and I just took the drastic decision, and I went, I'm going to join the Royal Air Force. Everybody went, really? No way. And I tried to join up as an officer and didn't have the education at the time. They said if you join up as a technician, it's dead easy to swap across, which wasn't true. And when I got in, I started my day release education because I realized, as I was getting older, how important education was. You needed that.
Yeah.
Started striving that, started working that, got my HNC. And then went to apply for a commission to be an officer in the Royal Air Force to step across. And just as I was about to apply, I got diagnosed with testicular cancer. And the problem with that is if you're in Civvy Street, getting cancer is a big issue, but it doesn't stop your career. But in the military, it's a big no-no. It stops your career dead. You don't promote, you don't sign on, everything else. And the challenge I had was I was in sight of being discharged, leaving the Air Force after time served. And I had people telling me and saying, medically discharge yourself from the Air Force, at least you'll get a pension and everything else. And I said, nope, I'm going to be an officer. I'm going to push for an officer. And I kept thinking, how am I going to make this happen? Because everything's against me at the moment. I'm sitting there thinking, Christ, what else are they going to throw at me? And in the end, I saw the surgeon who was treating me at the time. They medically downgraded me for 4 years originally. And I said, that's going to see my career. That's the end of my career. I can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
But he agreed to only do it for 3 years, which gave me a little bit of breathing space on the proviso that it didn't come back. By that time,
assuming that it didn't come back.
No, it didn't. Okay. I'm totally clear.
Good.
But the problem was that I was then going to be way over the age limit to apply for a commission for what they call a cadetship to be an officer. And I thought, this is ridiculous. What do I do now? And I was talking to people and they just said, oh, don't even bother. You're over the age limit. I said, no. How do I make this happen? What have I got to do? And they said, well, you got to have a really, really strong case. So I went out and I was playing rugby for the Air Force, and I pushed that to the upper level. I was doing athletics for the Air Force, and I pushed that up. I was doing a lot of martial arts.
Can I just ask, were you doing that to kind of prove I'm okay? Or
Yeah,
I
yeah,
imagine it was fun too, but it sounds like whatever you do, you go hell for leather at it. You're going to,
yeah. I mean, I was playing rugby anyway
yeah,
at a lower level, and I was doing athletics at a lower level. And I said, right, I'm going to prove. Let's knuckle down. Let's prove how good I am with everything else. I was doing martial arts. I Southern UK champion at Taekwondo in my federation,
wow,
and did a lot of charity work and everything else. And I was studying for a day release part-time degree as well. And I thought, right, I'm going to bring all this back, because the time I'm upgraded, it's going to be 4 years over the age limit. I'll come back with a case. And then along the way, I got recommended for an award, what they call the Air Officer Commanding Award, which is quite a high honor.
yeah,
And, for all my charity work and sportsmanship and fighting cancer and all this business. And in the end, that got thrown out and thrown up to the top award they could give me, which was at the time, which is a British Empire Medal from the Queen. And there was a rank distinction at the time, because that was the highest honor they can get. And I was a corporal at the time. And that was, they gave it to me. I was the only corporal in the entire military, apparently, to have that, because it was normally reserved for the higher ranks. And then when I was medically upgraded, I went for a commission and laid everything on the table and said, that's it. I can't do any more.
Yeah, I've done it all.
And I remember the two officers who were interviewing me stood up and shook my hand.
It's incredible. And one thing that massively struck me when we spoke the other day was your absolute determination. And I don't want to go back to the past, because you've talked about it and we've moved on. But if you think back to that 15-year-old, probably not so little boy, because you were probably about 6'7" then. But when you think back to being a young kid, it's such an important age. And then you had that shock, and then you had cancer in your early 20s, I think you said it was.
Mm.
And it just what I see with far less than that, without that level of adversity, is people going, well, I'm just unlucky, I just get woe is me. I don't get that from you at all. I get this just dogged determination that, all right, bring it on, whatever it is.
It is. I mean, I go back, my mother died when I was 15. By the time I was 19, I'd had 5 friends die. One of them was a girlfriend. And you kind of look at life and you think, what the hell are you going to throw at me next? And then you get up to, you join the Air Force, and then 24, you get testicular cancer. And I'm thinking, why? I wasn't drinking, I wasn't smoking. And I'm looking at all these people around me with beer bellies and flip top heads. And I'm thinking, what else do you want to throw at me? And you learn to you either curl up in a ball and die, or you just knuckle down and you just get on with it.
I think those are the two options, though, aren't they?
Yeah.
You either give up or you go, and you're clearly in the let's go camp. And I find that utterly inspiring. It's such an attractive quality in a leader, in a human being. And it's not always possible. Sometimes I'm sure you'll have been flawed and have moments when you cried your eyes out and everything else, because you're a human being too. But just shooting forward again then to when you got that accolade, the highest you could get, and those 2 officers shook your hand. What on earth went through your mind then? Were you surprised?
I was shocked.
Were you?
To be honest, when the 2 officers stood up, because I'm a little junior rank, and these 2 very senior officers stood up and shook my hand and said, congratulations. And I went, shit, what have I done? But yeah, I was accepted into the system. And I took the Queen's Commission and became an officer and went through all the training and everything else. All the challenge I had through my entire career then, from then on, was I was always fighting the system, because I was at least 4, maybe 6 years older than my contemporaries, because of bureaucratic red tape I was going through.
There was a lag. You were kind of lag to everybody else.
There was a lag all the way through.
And they don't see that as having the extra maturity as a positive thing, because I do.
No, because the way the Air Force works is, I learned later on that, for want of a better word, there's ageism in the Air Force, which is a bit of a challenge sometimes because they want you to get up into the very senior ranks, the air ranks.
Yeah.
But to get there, you have to start, be a senior officer by the time you're 12 and that sort of thing. You work it back.
Okay.
And it's really hard to sort of punch through that system and go for it all the way through. And it's, everywhere I went, I was older than my contemporaries. I was pushing. And I remember in the military, you have, in my career, I was an aviation engineer, and you have a new role every 2 years. You're moving around. So you're a jack of all trades, master of none. One minute you're leading 250 people, next minute you're a specialist or whatever. And we have a desk officer who sort of plots your career and puts you in the various slots. And he always told me, one of the desk officers early on said, your career is like a funnel. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you work hard and swim to the top of the funnel, you get the widest choice of jobs. And if you don't, then you just sink to the bottom and you get, this is your job, next job, and away you go.
Wow.
And I can remember every time 2 years was coming up, I'd go and sit with the desk officer and have a coffee with him, and he'd lay a load of jobs out and he'd say, take your pick, which one do you want? So every job I did in the military was a top job, and I selected it, and it was a lot of fun. And sometimes it was building up a new role.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was a research, I was a specialist for the MOD working in some crazy projects. And you just kept working. I kept pushing and proving myself all the way through.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to when I had the cancer. I had to prove myself and keep proving and pushing. And if there wasn't a way through the front door, let's go around the side and take the windows out, because there's always going to be a way through to get in there.
And, the two things I want to ask you that just come into my head is, and I'll go with the one I just remembered, because the other one's just flitted off somewhere for a second. Squirrels have got involved in my brain.
Okay, terrible, not the squirrels again. Yeah.
Is, you've got all these opportunities now, and someone could listen to what you just said and go, oh, you got all the opportunities you wanted and yada yada, and feel aggrieved by that. And they're often the people that haven't worked their backsides off to do it. And one of the things I talk to my clients about is having the right level of confidence. And you absolutely have. When you say that, I just hear, when you hear the backstory, I absolutely deserved it. You do what I call taking control of your career. Mm-hmm. You didn't just sit and mope. You got on with it. You took control and you made it happen. Some people don't understand the difference between confidence and arrogance. How do you tell the difference? And the reason I ask is, when I say to my clients, right now you need to have the confidence to go and share your brilliance, to share what you've learned, do this. And they're like, oh no, that's just showing off. That's arrogant. No, it's completely different, right? Yeah. How would you describe arrogance versus confidence?
One of the things,
anyone with arrogance in the world of the Royal Air Force, I bet you did.
Oh yeah, all the time. Particularly the two-wing master race, the pilots, they're very arrogant, but they have to be that sort of style of thing, because they're in an aircraft 30,000 feet and they're fighting, and they have to be arrogant and tough.
Yeah.
I was very humbled, because I realized that when I got my commission, I was very, very privileged because of my age and all the rest of the crap that I'd fought through. I was very honored and privileged to be given a commission by the Queen to become an officer. And once I got that, I would coach my teams to say, because everybody wants to be an officer and aspire, but not everybody can do it. So I would coach them and say, look, this is my story. This is what I did. I will help you any way I can. Yeah. And I had a few of them who went through and got a commission, and then they'd phone me up literally as they graduated and say, hey, Randal, remember me? I've just graduated as a whatever. I've got a Queen's commission. And it was like, wow, great. And, that's humbling. But I think two things came together with me. Was one, when I was younger as a teenager, I was a real hothead, getting myself into trouble and causing issues and God knows what else. And when I got into martial arts, that kind of taught me a self-confidence that I didn't have to have the big bravado and the big arrogance and everything else that I had before.
Yeah.
I didn't need that to get on with things. And in the military, you're kind of taught to understand people. And I have this thing, the 3 T's leadership we may come on to, but one of the things is getting to know the person beyond the 9 to 5, because a lot of people in civilian companies will just know the person from 9 to 5. They come to work and that's it. What baggage are they bringing to work? Are they dealing with a major personal crisis at home that the mother's ill, the wife is leaving them, the dog's died, or whatever else, right? Because in the military, we are very open about that sort of aspect and telling other people about it. Because the last thing I want is one of my troops, his wife's divorcing him, he's got big financial worries. I don't want him working on a 60 million pound aircraft. And I don't want him to get a gun and be on the gate guarding the camp with live bullets.
Yeah.
So this is why we're very open. And to do that, you have to get the trust of the individuals. So you have to be very humble, talk to people, to communicate with people, get out of them what's playing on their minds, what makes them tick, what do they want from life, how can I help them, and how can they help me? It's empathy, it's seeing it from the other person's point of view.
Yeah. I hear you use the word humble a couple of times, actually, and I'm thinking I've done a lot of work around these words because they mean different things, and I describe when you're lacking in confidence, you could either have extreme imposter syndrome, which is extreme low levels of self-confidence, or what I describe as humble plus, which is it's like humility on steroids. Humility is good, but humble plus can be a bit too much. One of the things I've been talking about bizarrely over the last couple of weeks, quite a few clients, is they've not been feeling good. I think the pressure is on in the world right now for all different reasons, be it AI, be the war, be it job losses. I don't know, but everyone's feeling the pressure, and they're feeling like they can't tell their bosses how they feel. And this is definitely worse in the more corporate setting you get, the worse it seems to get for some reason, but I may be wrong with that. And their fear is that if I tell them, then they're going to treat me differently.
Yep.
And take away responsibility and all this, that, and the other. And actually, what you've just said is you would do exactly that because you have to, because it's life and death.
Yeah.
So how does that translate into Civvy Street? What would you say to people who are feeling uncomfortable? Because whatever job you're in, we need to know how you're feeling. Because if we don't know how you're feeling, we can't support you and we can't care for you.
It's a challenge. I think, you hit the nail on the head earlier that the person's unwilling to tell their boss. And to me, that's a failure of the boss who's not been approachable for his staff to feel confident enough to come and see him. Because at the end of the day, the boss is still part of the team that the teams are working for. And We're all part of a team in a company that you've got to work together. And unless you work together, you're not going to produce the product or make the company successful or whatever else. To me, it all comes down to that communication piece, that you've got to communicate with each other and talk to each other. And this is, I talk about the 3 T's of leadership, which was a skill I learned in the military and I've taken forward into Civvy Street. And the first T is sort of trust the individual to get on with the job. So you give them the tools and the training, allow them to work within a framework, and don't long screwdriver and check on every 5 minutes, because that breeds confidence in the individual that you're trusting them to get on with the role. The next one is transparent. So to make sure, the number of times I've talked to somebody on the shop floor and they have no idea what's going on the corporate, the corporate head or where the company's going or what happens and everything else. So I always make sure that they feel part of the solution, because I'll come from the board and talk to them and everything else. And the other one is tailored. So the way you respond, I respond to, everyone else responds to a command will be totally different. So it comes back to that bit about finding out what makes the person tick. It could be that they like playing football for a Sunday league or something, or they may have a personal problem at home or something. You're trying to find out what makes them tick, what's on their mind at the time. And once you start knowing that, you can know how best to treat that individual. What thrives that individual? How do they like to be thanked?
Yeah.
Some people, when they do a good job, they want you to buy them a pizza and give them a bonus. Other ones say, just pat me on the back and say, thanks very much.
Yeah. And don't say anything at all because I get really embarrassed or
exactly.
And leave half an hour early.
But once you start knowing that, some people are quite happy to carry on working on the shop floor the rest of their lives. Other times, some people want to be, the next director of a firm or something. So if I know all that,
you don't know what people want. And there's what I see is so many assumptions and lots of finger crossing going, I think I've got it right. I think I've got it right. And when I say to people, how many one-to-ones are you having? Oh yeah, loads. What do you talk about? Numbers, projects. Tell me about the person. How many kids they got? When are their birthdays? What do they like to do at the weekends? Well, I think possibly. I'm like, no, no, no. You don't know. Why? Why is that so hard? Why?
I can remember
Why?
one of the companies I worked for when I came out of Civvy Street. They had a big problem with one of the directors who was leaving. He was throwing rocks everywhere. He'd made a lot of enemies in the company, and he was leaving. Um, and I went to see him because I literally just arrived at the company. Went to see him, had a coffee with him, and he just sat there for 20 minutes, half an hour, just putting every barrier in the way. It was everybody else's fault. Blah 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 blah. And I thought, right, I'm going to flip this. I'm going to get in your head. And I started talking to him and I started getting in his head. And it turned out that his brother had committed suicide 3 months previously, right? And he didn't know why. And then his mother had collapsed in a field and broken her hip. And she was overnight in a field for 24 hours while somebody found her. And that was playing on his mind. And I remember going back to see the CEO. And I said, "Are you aware of all this?" And he went, "No, didn't know anything about it." And I said, "Well, you know, this is what's going on. This is what's playing in his head." "Well, how do you know?" "Because that's what I do. I get into people's heads to find out what makes them tick."
What you say getting in people's heads, what you do is you give a shit, excuse the language, you show that you care, you take the time to ask the questions, and I'm going to guess that as a result of that, your relationship with that person is even better than it was before, and they will then move heaven and earth for you, which is something you definitely have to have in the military, because you never know when
you need someone to watch. We used to call it watching your six.
Yeah.
You know, so somebody, I used to really, I can remember once when it was really brought home to me that guys would watch my six. I was at we have what we call a beer call. It was a Friday afternoon. We were having beers in the squadron and everything else. And a fight broke out in the bar between two of the guys, right? And I'd just gone to the toilet behind the bar, not in the toilet, behind the bar, not behind the bar, so to speak. But
that's a bit gross.
Yeah, okay.
You want to share?
But as I came out, my number two and one of the senior sergeants literally grabbed me under either arm and said, "Time to leave, boss." Right? And the reason was because when the police turn up, because of the punch up, they go for the senior person. Because I was the senior person, they got rid of me very quickly, so they would take the liability. And that was them looking after my six. Now, the next morning, I got my number two, and I said, "What happened?" And he said, "Officially, sir, nothing." And I said, "What happened?" And he told me such and such, punch such and such in the face, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, we dealt with that issue and sorted it. But that's, you know, people looking after your number six. And in Civvy Street, I get it as well, where I will maybe come up with an idea, but I may not think it totally through. But I want to create a situation where everybody in my team feels confident enough to go, "Actually, boss, I don't think that's going to work because of X, Y, Z. Why don't we try ABC?" And I go, "Actually, brilliant, great." And then we're kind of forging the idea between us and we're bouncing it. But then I've given them the confidence to approach me.
Yeah.
And I've also created my own approachability to them that they
absolutely. It's got to be a two-way street, but I think the door starts with the leader. I will often encourage people to, whatever the leader's doing, is to lead brightly, which is what I talk about, but lead with the confidence, the emotional intelligence, and the communication effectiveness to show up effectively, irrespective of what your boss is doing. But it's a hard fight.
It is a hard thing. I mean, the thing is, you've got a manager and you've got a leader, and everybody wants to think of themselves as a leader. In the military, we are taught to be leaders.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about it, when the proverbial hits the fan, they call the police in. But when it really hits the fan, you call the military in, because the military's got the discipline, the bearing, and everything else.
Yeah.
I've seen so many people in Civvy Street who, you know, if you look at the recommendations of my profile, people write reviews for me because they like the way I operate, they like how I do things, and they follow me because of that.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen so many people, particularly in Civvy Street, who go, "I'm a leader," and then you talk to the troops and they say, "No, we just follow him out of curiosity to see what he's going to screw up next."
Or we follow them because we have no choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And people, you know, ruling by fear and being a leader by fear. Yeah. Okay. There are occasions you might need to do that, but 90% of the time, if you've got the right balance and your troops trust you and you've worked with them and you know, they're holding you at the forefront, You don't need to lose your temper. I was always taught, if you lose your temper, you've lost the battle,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Always
completely.
keep a level head all the way through.
The same with kids, isn't it? We learn
Yeah,
kids as
yeah,
well. Once you've lost your temper, they've won completely.
yeah. They've won. So
Uh,
always keep a level head.
I was thinking about this. Watching your number six. I'd love that in corporate.
Yeah.
If everybody felt like they were watching everybody's back and they cared, but because of the way that so many organizations are set up to just purely focus on numbers and not measuring or rewarding people on the behaviors. I'm really lucky that I get people on here on purpose because they're my kind of people that lead so well that they don't just focus on that. They talk about people, the importance of psychological safety, creating trust, all of that wonderful stuff. This is what we need to bring into corporate. But until corporates start measuring the right stuff, I can't see how it's ever going to happen. And because there are so many layers to who decides what's going to get measured, the shareholders right at the top, or the business owners, whichever way around it is, if we don't get to them and we can't change their minds, how much can we do? You're showing me that we can do an awful lot anyway.
You really need to drive it. And it's, I can remember being in companies, Jaguar Land Rover, for example, and they send out the electronic survey and fill in what you're thinking about the company and all the rest of it. And then they put the spin on it. 32% of people think the company's doing brilliant. Okay, well, what about the other 68%?
I'm surprised to actually promote that as anything.
Yeah, and I used to see it all the time, the spin on everything.
2%. That's kind of telling you that it's not great.
Yeah, exactly. But it's that sort of, we'll always put a positive spin on the messaging and everything else. And I can remember I had some really good teams working for me in JLR, and I developed them to watch my six. I remember, and I always used to have a close knit. There was a close knit number two with me, and before I made a major decision, I would sit and talk to him and I'd say, why don't we do this? Can we do that? Can you see any problem with that? And he might go, no, yeah, it's a good idea. Or he might go, no, actually, do this a little bit over here. And we kind of bounce it. And it's a bit of a laissez-faire sort of approach, I suppose, rather than being dictatorial and saying, right, everyone, off you go.
But that doesn't work. I mean,
I've seen it time and time again. Everyone comes in and goes, right, everyone over to the left. No, we can't do that because of this. And you've just lost all credibility straight away.
Yeah.
So it's trying to balance it out of what you have to do. And it's just different leadership styles.
It's different leadership styles, but it's knowing. So first of all, we need to learn what they are. And there are six that I talk about. Mm-hmm. And the one that should be used least and is probably used most is commanding. Because people think I'm a leader, I must tell you what to do. And actually, when you dig underneath that belief, there's a huge amount of fear that I should know what I'm doing. And if it all goes wrong, it's on my head. So having the skills to lead yourself, which you just leak out of you manage yourself. And I notice you to me, it just screams of you've dropped the ego. There's no ego here. You could have a huge ego, but you've decided to drop it and actually do the self-leadership piece, which helps you lead others and have more success in the most extreme conditions where life and death are a thing, but also on Civvy Street, you've brought that in, you've shown it can work, and you've shown it makes a difference. Have you ever had a moment when you felt the confidence get knocked? Because of the story you've told me, I'm kind of thinking there must have been times when you've just probably want to sit in a corner and weep. Have you ever had moments like that? Or have you always been kind of, 6'7" and upright?
I mean, the thing is, when I walk into a room, people notice me.
Well, you can't help it because you're blind.
I was taught how to communicate with people, how to hold a conversation with people, how to get to know people and everything else. And as such, when dignitaries came round, I was kind of the guy that was pushed forward. So I've hosted the Queen when she was alive, Charles, Diana. I used to work with Will. I never met Diana, sorry. Margaret, Prince Philip, Camilla. I used to work with Wills and all that. I've worked with a lot of the royal family and a lot of mayors and a lot of dignitaries and prime ministers and all the rest of it. And once you get to that sort of level, I've got no ego to grind. I've kind of I was wanted to be an officer. I became an officer when I went out in the Civvy Street. I made a success of that. I pivoted from automotive engineering, from aviation engineering in the Royal Air Force into automotive engineering, and that was a hell of a change. It was okay. It was engineering, but it's two different things. And I just, as I grew older, I just got humbled by it, and I didn't need to do it. And I found that if I worked with teams rather than telling teams directly, but realized that I was part of the team as well, then it kind of humbles you and makes you appreciate that we are a team together to make something happen. The other thing that always gets me is, I've seen it a few times, is where one of the team messes up, something goes wrong, and the manager suddenly puts the umbrella up and goes, nope, it wasn't me, it was him. Yeah, but who does he work for? Oh, well, he works for me, but it was his fault, and all this business. And one of the things I found really humbling one time was one of my teams messed up quite bad, and I stood up and I said, I take the bullet for this, to the hierarchy. And then you turn back to the team members and say, right, how do we stop this happening again? And you sort of, then we work that, and we don't rip his head off and everything else. We don't lose your temper or anything else. Confidence wise is it's interesting, because I've been bred in a thing where, I've been trained in an environment where you have to have confidence. You have to exude confidence.
Even if you're not really feeling it, you need to pretend that you have.
Yeah, you have to have the confidence, because there's a lot of people hinging off of you in terms of your team, looking up to you to say, if the boss is shit, then we're really in shit.
But even before you were a boss, though, so when you're in the lower ranks, were the moments when you would stop and go, can I actually do this? Or is it never really? I've got a feeling that because you're so focused on what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, and everything else. I'm wondering if even confidence even came into your mind. It doesn't with everybody.
A lot of it was, I learned very early on that there's always a way through, right?
Yeah.
There's always a way. Okay, you get turned away from a nightclub or whatever else. Okay, that's a logistical thing you're not going to go through. But if somebody's saying to me, the road's, there's a tree in the way and we can't go through it, I'll say, well, what do we do to get around it? How do we make this happen? And you put the positive.
You focus on the action.
Yeah.
I think this is a really important thing for people to understand when you want to stop thinking negative thoughts about yourself, or stop worrying about not being good enough, everything else, is focus on the thing ahead.
Yeah.
And I talk a lot about having the power of a personal vision, not just a work vision. We all need one of those as well. Where are we going? Where are we taking the troops to? But a personal vision. Where do I want to be in a year's time as me? What do I want people to be saying about me? What do I want people to be thinking about me? What do I want to have achieved? How do I want to feel about myself?
Yeah.
And as soon as people sort of lock onto that, and that's what I'm hearing with you, is you'd already locked onto it. You lock onto what's the plan, or create a plan, then we can work around it, and we spend less time worrying about ourselves. I think that's a really important message.
I think there is. I mean, one of the other things I always do is when I make a decision, and again, it goes back to my military training, is you look at what we call second and third order outcomes of everything that you do. There's so many people make a very rash decision without thinking of it, and then all of a sudden they hit a wall because they haven't thought of where this, if we do this, what happens next? And if we do that, what happens next? What's the second and third order outcomes of it?
So you're talking about strategic thinking.
Strategic thinking going forward.
Yeah.
And a lot of my roles that I've been in an MD, COO, CTO, and all that business, senior officer, is always taking that strategic view, looking long term. What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? So I've got the team sort of looking at me behind and saying, right, boss, we need the leadership. What's going? And, I would land with my teams in South America or Africa or wherever else we were going when we were flying around the world. And I would say, right, you go and sort the hotels out, you sort the transport out, find us a restaurant to get into, and, you sort the money out and the accommodation and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then everyone had a task, and they would go off and do things, because that's what you do. You empower the individual to get on with the task.
So they become a powerful team.
Exactly, because the sayings we always have in the military is, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution, right? Because I was involved in every one of their reporting chains, all my teams. if you're bringing me, you might come to me and say, boss, we got this problem, but I'm going to do this, right? You okay? And I go, yep, tech VG, go for it. But, when somebody comes to me like out in Civvy Street and says, oh, I've got this problem, my IT system's not working. And, what do you want me to do? And they want me to phone IT and sort them out. And I said, no, you sort it out. You take the ownership of this sort of thing. And it's really taking responsibility for what you're doing, taking responsibility for your actions, and proving to me, if you want a promotion and you want to be a director or whatever, proving to me that, live up to the part, and prove that you can do it.
I mean, a lot of the times when people are going to ask for the help, it's because the boss or the leader is the bottleneck, and they haven't learned to extend trust.
Yeah,
haven't learned to help people be accountable. And I've seen many, many people go into new jobs thinking, well, this is how it should be, and then they come across a leader like you, and they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm allowed to have a thought. And I'm allowed to be accountable. And although I have to work within these boundaries, I'm allowed to bounce around within here. This is cool. It doesn't happen enough at all.
It's a very fine skill to learn, to allow that trust and everything else. People are very poor at delegation. That's one thing.
Why?
Delegation.
Why do you think that?
Because they worry about they're going to, if it goes wrong, they're going to be held responsible for it. They're going to lose a job and everything else. Delegation is a very, very difficult thing for people to do, but it's extremely powerful if you give it to one of your team members and say, right, I'm giving you this task. I need you to do this, and this task is critical. Your kudos has just gone through the roof because you're now empowering one of your team members to take on this very, very challenging task. Yeah. And people just, they struggle to do that. I remember there was a company I was working for, and one of the managers, he had teams working out around the UK in various environments. And he had a huge spreadsheet, had about 10, 15 people, I think, working for him. And he had a spreadsheet. So when these guys went out doing the bits in the warehouses and the retailers and all the rest of it, he would phone the retailer up after the guy had been in to get a report on how the guy operated. What was he talking about? How long was he there? Did you find him okay? He'd have this huge spreadsheet of all these reports of what these guys were saying and what the other companies were saying they were visiting. And I thought, where does the empowerment come on that? And it just killed, when his teams found out about it, killed free thought. They were like, what? What
a waste of time and energy.
Exactly. And most people leave a job because of a bad boss.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the misunderstanding, is that it takes too much time to do the stuff that we're talking about. And my pushback is, it will take you a little bit of investment up front to do this properly. And then you will gain so much more time back. And everybody that trusts me with this and buys into it and learns how, they always come back and go, I've actually got some time in my day. What do I do with it? Because all of a sudden, I'm not wasting my time and energy. We are running out of time, but there's a couple of things I just wanted to check with you or ask you. Is what I'm hearing underneath all of this is, in the military, you have to learn to lead yourself. You have to. In the corporate world, no one's, unless they choose to, or unless I get hold of them, or so another amazing coach gets hold of them, they don't learn about self-leadership.
True.
Right.
True.
I was blowing my own trumpet there. Was that overconfident? Who cares? Anyway,
there's other career coaches beyond you.
Do you think that is something that if that was missing, what would happen to the military? If all of you didn't have that emotional self-control when it mattered, what on earth would happen?
We'd fall apart.
People military, right?
You can imagine that the military's got a very regimented system, right? Particularly if you get in the army, you have guys that probably aren't the brightest, person. They've sort of failed school or whatever else. They've ended up in the army. You tell them to go and do something and say, go and jump, and they'll just jump, and they'll do whatever you tell them to do. And that's the regimented system. Everybody in the military, you're working for a hierarchy somewhere. You're working for a boss.
Yeah.
Right? The airmen side of it, they are used to being told what to do to a certain extent. But the higher up they get in there, they start thinking for themselves. As the officer, when you get into the officer ranks, you become an example for the troops. Okay. And there's this very delineation that we have an officers' mess, they call it, which is like the officers' bar and hotel where some of the officers stay and entertain. And then you have the airmen side of it. And the airmen are not allowed to see the officers getting drunk or fraternizing or everything else. You're not really allowed to have relationships between officers and air persons, right? Because it breaks down that sort of trust and elitism that the officer is a sort of god and everything else.
Yeah.
So it's if you don't have that hierarchy, if you imagine, you're in battle somewhere, you need someone who's going to do what you say. If you say, go and kill that person or go and attack that tank, you need to know and trust that they are going to do that to the best of their ability.
Yeah.
Because your life depends on it and the rest of your troops' lives depends on it.
Yeah.
So that's the way we're bred and we're instilled. Now bring that into Civvy Street, that sort of discipline and bearing and confidence and everything else. That's a major feature that you can play into Civvy Street.
Yeah.
And not everybody goes out and shouts and everything else. Sometimes you don't need to do that. Sometimes you get someone like me who just can talk to people and get into people's heads quite easily.
You shouldn't need to shout. I mean, I'm amazed. I've seen people shouting at work, and I have to admit, once I shouted at work, but that wasn't. I was very junior, and I was being so badly treated. In the end, I blew my top. I shouted. That's the one time I can remember doing it. But you just don't do that. What would you say to people that are looking for brilliance, but maybe they're discounting people who have earned their stripes?
It's a really really tough field. I mean, I'm looking around for a new role at the moment, and just sort of speculating out there. And time and time again, I read the forums on recruiting and everything else. And everyone goes, "Oh, ageism," right? It's a very, very difficult one to prove, because if you do anything with diversity, equality, and inclusivity in that, and you discriminate against females or whatever else, it's very easy to prove it. A lot of people speculate, you turn me down because I'm female or disabled or whatever else. That's a difficult one. Ageism is a really difficult one. And there's a few companies I'm aware of. I remember a recruiter friend of mine, we were having dinner one night, and he said the company said, he was doing a job for a company and they wanted an MD, but the MD had to be under the age of 35 with 10 years experience as an MD. And I went,
MD, are they going to be at 25?
Well, exactly. I said, the only way you're going to find someone like that is if he's running his own company as an MD.
Yeah.
And he had to go back through people's profiles and trying to work out how old the person was by going through the degrees and everything else. And he found someone who was 36 and they got in the company. And there was another company, I was talking to a CEO a couple of months back, and they said they just hired a COO for the company, but they hired a young chap because they wanted longevity from the post with him. And I thought, well, that's blatant ageism straight out. And there's a lot of it.
Ridiculous. Because most people in those C-suite positions will be around for a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And then they'll move because it gets stale. You do your thing, but you leave a legacy of brilliance behind you, hopefully. And then you take that to somewhere else. So
that's the thing. In the old days, you went for a job for life. You signed up with a company, did 30, 40 years, and then you retired. Nowadays, people swap jobs every few years. They'll do 3 years here, 3 years there, and they're bouncing, chasing the money all the way through.
Or just excitement and change.
Yeah. But I was quite shocked when I talked to this recruiter and he said this thing about, MD 35, and his CEO quite blatantly said, we hired the CEO. He was a young chap and we want longevity in the post. And I thought, bloody hell, how the hell are you getting away with that? But it's out there. I hear of it. I haven't come across it, but I hear of it, with other people and companies and that. Sometimes it's speculating. People say I got turned down because I was too old. Well, were you realistic when you applied it?
Yeah, but how do you know?
How do you prove it?
And what I would say to this is that when I'm helping people with smashing their interviews, is we're back to mindset. If you think you're too old and you've made
carry that into the interview
because you're too old, you are leaking that out all the time, and they're not necessarily picking up your age. What they're picking up is discomfort from you, which makes them feel uncomfortable, which means you don't get the job for some spurious reason, which you'll then take as I was too old. And that's what you've done, is you've sabotaged your own success rather brilliantly.
Exactly. Exactly.
So we need to switch that and actually we're back to the self-leadership piece, mindset.
Yeah.
Everything you've said today just underpins everything that I believe in, what I believe is possible, what I thrive on hearing about, what I strive to help other leaders achieve. If there was one thing that you could leave the listeners or the viewers with today to it's kind of something that you've learned along the way that's helped you the most. We may have already talked about it a bit today. What would that be? Just one thing to leave them with.
There's always a way.
There's always a way. Nice.
Yeah, there's always a way through. You know, the military side, if we can't go through the front door, go around the side and take the windows out and go in that way. It's there's always a way through. And the skill is trying to understand what that is. And, you know, be realistic. If you're trying to get into a nightclub and they turn you away because you're drunk or whatever else, okay, there isn't a way to get in. That's it.
Yeah.
But I would always go, if I can't go across that road because there's a tree in the way, right? How do I make this work? Always flip it the other way. People spend so long putting barriers in the way. I can't work because.
It's all their own barriers though, right?
Flip it the other way and say, right, how do I make this work?
Nice.
How do we make this happen? You know, we come back to what we were saying earlier about the whole EV, renewable energy, and making things happen for a better world. And it's got to happen. It's one of those things that's got to happen. How do we make this happen?
How? Yeah.
Positive thinking, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. What an absolutely brilliant bit of advice to leave on, and one I applaud wholeheartedly. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. I could talk for hours. We probably will after this as well. But thank you very much. And if people want to get hold of you or find you and learn more about what you do, for a speaker, for a role, for anything.
Have a look. Type in Randal Tiny Smith on LinkedIn. You'll see my profile. I've got about 23,000 followers and everything, and there's a lot of videos. I'm regular posting and stuff. Just drop me a direct message on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to help or have a chat about anything.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone that's listened. If you've liked the podcast today, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment. That would just make my dream come true. Randal, thank you, and I'm sure we will talk again soon.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Well, very welcome.